Okay, I would like to call this meeting of the Governance and Ethics Committee to order at 10:03 a.m. I have a script here to read regarding Zoom. This meeting will be recorded. The Zoom application will notify you that this meeting is being recorded. Please press continue on the Zoom application to stay in the meeting. Use the raise your hand feature in Zoom when you would like to speak on an item, and also lower your hand when you finish speaking. Please unmute when called to speak and mute yourself when you are done speaking. If you are calling in by phone, identify yourself by name before speaking on an item. Press *9 on your phone to raise and lower your hand. Press *6 if you are participating by phone to unmute. Okay, Maria, could you call the roll, please?
Chair Jane,
Here.
Member Park,
Here.
and I believe Member Shahal is not attending today.
Can I make a motion to excuse Member Chahal?
I'll second that. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, there being none opposed, passes to.
Through the chair. Just for the record, I'll note that Member Jahal is traveling back from city travel in Washington, D.C., and that's why he cannot be here today.
Yes, he's attending the NCPA lobbying efforts. Yes. Okay, now we move on to the consent calendar. There's only one item on the consent calendar, 1A, approval of the March 3rd, 2025 Governance and Ethics Committee meeting minutes. Is there?
I'll make a motion to approve consent.
Is there any member of the public that would like to pull the consent item? Okay, anybody want to pull that? Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. I'll second it. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes 2-0. All right, now we move on to public presentations. Is there any member of the public that would like to address this body on a matter that is not on the agenda?
We have a hand raised online. We have Wanda Buck. I'm going to allow her to speak. Wanda?
Hi, yes, I am Wanda Buck. Hello. And I'm not sure, I read the agenda, that this is on the agenda or not. And I wrote something last night to all the mayor and council that I want to be sure is included. So I hope I'm not out of order. But humbly, I have been wanting to contribute to our city being seen more ethically, wherein citizens can continue the high level of regard for the city like in the past. Since 2005, I've been a leader and involved in real estate professional standards at the local, state, and national levels. This also has included education and training classes on mediation and ombudsman certifications, conflict resolutions, and negotiation from Pepperdine Law, Stanford, and Harvard. A separate ethics commission or committee with members, not all on the city council, could help Santa Clara. Attached are some contributory ideas I also think could be positive rather than punitive. Resistance is understandable due to time and money as well as political ramifications. Mainly a goal of professional ethics at council meetings like the priority setting one could avoid some of the criticism by the citizens. Also, expanding the training and education in addition to the state requirements is a positive step. In sum, please let's move forward to show we are indeed a city of what's possible. Thank you, and for all your time. Please click when you read the email on the attachment. Thank you again.
Thank you, Wanda. Okay, are there any other members of the public that wish to speak on an item not on the agenda?
We have no other hands on the online.
Okay. Now we'll move on to general business. This is item number 2, discussion and request for direction on a comprehensive city charter update process for presentation to the city council. I will pass it on to City Attorney Glenn Googans to discuss this item.
Thank you, Chair Jane. Really appreciate the opportunity to present to you today, at least the concept at this stage of a top to bottom professional review and possible comprehensive amendment of the city charter. The objective of this exercise would be to identify terms of the city charter that warrant modernization and clarification, and to submit proposed changes in a comprehensive format for consideration by the voters in November of 2026. Slide, please. But I want to step back a little bit before we dive into that and talk about briefly what is the city charter and how we got here. The Santa Clara City Charter, like all charters in the state of California, in effect operates like the city of Santa Clara's constitution. Like our US Constitution, the charter establishes the basic structure of our city government and how things are supposed to work. The key elements that listed here in the charter include creation of our basic structure of government known as the council manager form of government, where the elected council makes major policy decisions and an appointed city manager implements those policy decisions and manages the day-to-day operations of the city. Our charter also includes qualifications and processes for electing and appointing certain city officials. It allocates authority and duties among elected, appointed, and hired officials. It includes a process for the adoption of resolutions and ordinances, the laws of the city. It contemplates, like really all charters, the creation of certain core boards and commissions, in this case, planning, parks and rec, civil service, and the library board of trustees. And it also creates the possibility and process for the creation of other boards and commissions to assist the city in its governance. It also includes, like really all charters I've seen, rules for the city's fiscal management, public works implementation, and procurement practices, even extending to the manner and mechanism in which we grant franchises for providing certain services. Another important thing that charters do is by adopting a city charter, the city asserts its authority over what are known as municipal affairs. And municipal affairs are traditionally in a number of different categories. It includes how we elect our officials, how we structure our workforce, what we consider to be a public work and how we procure public works. Importantly, our fiscal administration and our land use policies. As you all know, because you get frustrated with this and we're frustrated to have to describe these things to you, state government thinking, we think not always correctly, that they know better, often adopt different rules that encroach on these different municipal affairs in different ways. It's lawful for them to do that. It's not always lawful for them to do that. And you'll see from time to time, charter cities push back and fight on that to kind of preserve their authority and discretion over these municipal affairs. But there is a significant still value for charter cities to be charter cities because of the ability to have at least some substantial dominion over these municipal affair categories. In in the state of California, there are about 126 or so of the 480 or so, cities that are charter cities. The rest, about 360, are general law cities governed by the very detailed statutes that are applicable to cities in various sections of the governing, mostly in the government code of state law. But by population, even though there are far fewer charter cities, because most major cities are charter cities, there's actually more people governed under the charter city form of government than under the general law city form of government. All charters, really, that's not true. Really, most charters are from the original era and have very standard provisions. I think they were passing around a form charter, back when they first did this. As our city clerk knows, because he's done some research into this lately, ours was adopted and we'll get into this back in 1951. That's when a lot of them were adopted between the late 40s, kind of in early 50s. And there are a number of cities recently, again, trying to be able to assert their municipal affairs authority that have adopted charters in the last 20, 30 years or so. Unlike the original charters and how a number of charters have evolved over time, these are often very short. They're just a few pages, 3, 4, 5 pages, and often do not much more than assert your authority over municipal affairs and allow all the other implementing rules to be made under city council approved ordinances. Next slide, please. That's the general idea behind charters. Now looking at our charter history, as I mentioned, Santa Clara's charter was first adopted in 1951. Multiple amendments have been proposed and adopted since that time. Most of these have been limited in targeting maybe 1 or 2 areas. There have been a few big years, 72, 77, 2000, 2016 took on more than just, a single subject for consideration by the voters, and that's allowed. You can do comprehensive updates. You can do smaller things, unlike at a state law level where, as you're probably familiar, there are more limitations on what all can be included in a measure that's tendered to the voters. We've got a lot more flexibility here on a local level. So there's been a lot of changes over time in various forms. The most common types of proposed changes, and I think this is typical, are the terms and qualifications for elected officials. Things that are often tendered to the voters relate to who's elected, how they're elected, what the terms and qualifications are. Should there be term limits, not term limits? Very often that's and I think this is probably true statewide, that's where a lot of consideration and amendments are made. The last comprehensive amendment in Santa Clara really was adopted in 2000. But the changes were relatively minor, but it was comprehensive and touched on a variety of sections. You have in your packet, and appreciate the city clerk staff effort in putting these things together, a summary of the ballot measures for the amendments to the charter from 1952 to the present. And so that's an interesting read. I'm sure there's stories behind, those measures and a lot of interesting cases, but that you have been active in amending your charter, like a lot of cities are. Next slide, please. So why consider a comprehensive charter update process at this time? Primary reason is really since 1952 and even since 2000, a lot has changed, both in the laws that apply to cities and what are considered to be best practices for city operations. The city itself has grown and changed in population, in complexity. And so in order to make the city charter consistent with current laws and best practices, to improve city efficiency and to eliminate ambiguities, the charter itself wasn't perfectly clear when it was first adopted. A lot of the amendments that were adopted since then are not perfectly clear and subject to interpretation. So there are ambiguities there. To address those things, city staff and city manager is fully supportive of this process, is proposing that the city consider engaging in a comprehensive charter update process for presentation to the city voters in 2026. Next slide, please. I've given you a few examples of things that both my groups have observed and have been shared with me as things that warrant kind of consideration and possible amendment as part of this process, because I wanted to give you a feel for what that really is. And I've listed some here on the next couple of slides, and there's many more than that. And again, this is just a very light touch of what the possibilities are. The first is for elected officials, clarify the timing and application of the 30-day residency requirement. That comes up in elections. It came up this election with very real questions about exactly how that applies. I won't get into the details of it, but further clarity, I assure you, would be warranted. So the people who have to interpret these things and apply these things understand exactly how that works. There is a provision in your charter that seems quaint, but can be burdensome in section 714 that requires special notice of any sale by the city of proposed or lease of the city of real estate. It requires that notice be provided to the public in the newspaper, describing the price and terms for that, and almost like it's a foreclosure sale where that transaction is going to be consummated. The limit for the kinds of transactions that are governed by this is anything greater than $500. This is not I don't think a sensible, requirement, not really a modern, requirement back in the late 40s or 50s. And maybe for a city that, it doesn't own much property, right? And there would be a big deal if they were selling any of their property. This might make sense. It does not make sense in a current modern context. There are other provisions that would account for that. It certainly shouldn't be in the city charter. Number 3 here, clarification regarding what constitutes a disposition or change of use of city park property requiring a vote of the people. You're all familiar with Measure R. It was adopted not that long ago. It was adopted in good faith with the idea of preserving, city park assets and not having them converted to alternative uses. We just recently had an issue with that, right? Where there was some ancillary use that was proposed that wouldn't have compromised, the park use for, I believe, telecommunications, facilities. The city council, I think in this case, reasonably decided that did not make sense, right? To have those located there. But one of the things that would have impeded that was a vote of the people arguably would have been required for that. Does that make sense? Should that, should there be a closer look at what constitutes a disposition of those things? Maybe yes, maybe not. But again, a thing that we've experienced recently that probably warrants, some further clarification. Clarifying this next one, clarify roles and responsibilities of the elected city clerk, right? What is really the city clerk, supposed to do? How much authority does the city council to say you only do this much as opposed to this much? The way the charter provisions work and the way that's been implemented by ordinance is not entirely clear. Arguably that warrants, some additional clarification. Updating and clarifying the roles and responsibilities of the library board of trustees. Back in the late 40s, early 50s, I think library boards of trustees ran the library system. That is not how things operate now. They provide important oversight, on major policy issues in combination with another nonprofit group. They help raise money, right, and resources for the library, but they are not, in charge of the day-to-day administration and oversight of the library. The charter needs some clarification and update on that to kind of modernize, the role for that. Next slide, please. There's budget provisions in here that really are oriented towards a single year budget process. They do not contemplate a 2-year budget process. A lot of cities have gone to that. And it's in some respects hard to interpret and apply that charter provision to how we should adopt our budget and amend our budget because it doesn't contemplate the 2-year cycle. We have to extrapolate. So revising and updating that provision to account for multiple year budget processes is also a good modern best practices idea. The next one, increasing the threshold for public works or the use of city forces requiring city council approval. Currently, the charter provides that any public work valued at greater than $1,000 or any project where we want to use city forces that's valued at more than $1,000 needs city council approval. That is a 1951 number. Maybe it was increased since then, it might have been low, but it's certainly not a 2025, number. And, some numbers substantially higher than that would certainly make sense, in a modern context. Or eliminating the number entirely, which is what a lot of places do, and just have a definition of major or minor projects and have the city council administering that by ordinance would be a modern best practices, thing to do. Another thing missing from our public works and procurement practices charter that we really need in order for us to be able to do that the way we'd want to here is the ability to use design build procurement processes. Our current charter contemplates public works procurement that is bid and awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. That's great. And that is a standard. But there are, in modern circumstances, particularly with complex projects, reason to do it differently and to have a design build provision that authorizes that, probably the details of which would be implemented by ordinance, certainly could help with any number of complex projects, particularly the kind that SVP does. But now that we have $400 million, of infrastructure bond money to spend, there are other complicated projects that lend themselves to the design, build, procurement mechanism, including replacement of fire stations. I'm very confident that our public works folks would appreciate having that tool as an option in order to implement those types of projects. Other wonkier things here that lawyers love and people think aren't necessarily important, but kind of are to clarify how and when state laws apply. If there's no city charter provision or ordinance, the relationship between a charter and state law, again, where they encroach oftentimes, and we ourselves look to the helpfulness of state law structures in order to fill the gaps when our charter doesn't address those. There definitely needs to be some clarity about how our charter relates with state laws. And then just miscellaneous changes to section headings, to wording, to organization, to make our charter a more user-friendly document so that the public can understand it better, the different departments that use it can understand it better, to make it user-friendly. Those things are certainly warranted and was a very important part of the process that I engaged in down in Chula Vista before I came up here. That charter was even more of a behemoth. It was upwards of 70 pages. When we got done with it, we lost about 20 pages, and it read a lot better using modern parlance with things organized in ways where they could be easily found and used and applied both by staff and by the public a lot. So these are just a few things, right, generated by our observations. There's so much more potentially in that, so the process, if we embark on it, would likely yield many more ideas. But the idea for this project is again, as I would describe it, not a political process, right? Not picking up highly sensitive things that might be standalone type measures, but at least go through the exercise of reviewing the charter, identifying things that warrant update and modernization and improvement, and tendering those for consideration. Next slide. This is just to show you how excited my group gets when we talk about these wonky things. Sue Reuter from my group did this with respect to the existing provisions in the charter regarding civil service, right? This is her first cut, on the things that she saw that would make sense to improve it. There really is a lack of clarity in how our existing charter provisions apply, because it doesn't use modern titles, for what we now call things, as to who's a classified and an unclassified employee. And that, of course, is a very important distinction, with classified employees getting civil service protections and unclassified, serving, at will. That's a crucial thing for structure of government and efficiency of government. And there's a logic to what goes in what category. Right now, ours is not clear and not up to date. Modifications to the civil service section are interesting because when you change things like this, you actually need to go through a meet and confer, or at least a meet and consult process with the impacted labor groups. So that would be a step, at least as it relates to this, any changes that might be proposed here. And again, this is just an example of the kind of thing that might be done. And the structure of any approach along this lines would be, and this is really important. Maybe I think it's in the next slide. So let's go to the next slide of what the envisioned process might be, because I think we'll get to it. So the process envisioned would be, with input and support from this committee, what we would recommend that you do is that a preliminary city charter comprehensive review and update work plan, right? Not with the details, but just with the process, be developed and presented to the city council for its consideration. Really would be less specifics, right? It's not, you should change these particular provisions. It would really be more, what is this exercise that we contemplate, and what do we think the end work product, will look like for presentation to the voters. At that point, if the city council desires to proceed, it would then create a charter review committee to help implement that work plan. The chair and I were talking briefly before, this meeting convened about, what would be included in that and what would the charter, review commission's authority be. It would really be what the city council decides it to be. You could give them a charge, right? And we want you to look at these things and we want you to implement this work plan, right? And bring this back to us. It could be broader than what I've contemplated here. We're recommending a more narrowed, focused, version, of this so that we could have a comprehensive update, particularly with the time that we have between now, and 2026. But it would be for you to recommend and for ultimately for the city council to decide what that scope of work, should look like. The city council would ultimately decide on the appointment process for a charter review commission if you decided to proceed and they decided to proceed. But as you know, the typical composition includes a council member recommended appointee from each council district and an at-large member. That process could be used again here. I'm not proposing anything, different for purposes of implementing this project. And here's the part I almost started on, but knew it was mentioned in this slide. A key element of this process is input from the affected city departments. This is really intended to be a professional, what does the city do? How does the charter align with that? If it does align, how do we make the charter better? And again, not in any inappropriate way, not taking things away from the public that should be taken away from the public, but how do we align the charter with state law, with best practices, and the best liaisons, for that in communing with the Charter Review Commission are the affected staff, departments. So civil service, the sections would have input from human resources group, in my group, and potentially even from union groups, right? Who might come before a Charter, Review, Commission and present to them things that they thought are concerns that they might have. All the fiscal sections would be communications from and input from the finance department, right? As to how does the charter align or not, with what their practices are. Public Works should be consulted on what the Public Works and procurement, process would be. So there are all sorts of, in city manager's office, of course, on all the above, on things, the workings of government, if there is clarity or lack of clarity as to who does what. All of that, staff would be very much engaged in this. And usually are eager to do it because they themselves have issues with the charter, right? And particularly with the very low dollar limits on things, the potential cost savings of having to prepare staff reports and support it in front of you every time, we want to deploy SVP staff in order to fix something greater than $1,000. That does save more staff time than maybe even we all realize, and having to put together, those packages and present it to you for your consideration and review. The timing of this to meet the 2026 ballot measure submittal requirements, which usually are, we have to have it done and submitted to them in early August, for the November election, really means we need to get going, on this. So boy, I say we should commence no later than September 2025. This is a big lift. And so as soon as you guys could consider this, give us direction if you decide, to present a concept for this to the city council. And the sooner that if they in fact decide to proceed, you all decide to proceed, we can create a charter review commission and get and dig in on this. That would be great. I've got an experience with this, as you know, hence some of my enthusiasm, because it really was a great, very effective process down in Chula Vista where I came up. It was Measure K. We implemented it in 2022. It was adopted with a very high supermajority of folks reviewing it. We had the advantage of having a standing charter review commission, right? Folks who were immersed in the charter and very familiar with it, out of the get-go. But even with that took 18 months, for us to really go through the process. We ended up creating subcommittees, of the group to focus in on different sections of the Charter Review Commission. Those subcommittees interacted with the departments that were affected by the proposed changes. I think that charter was really more of a mess, than our charter is, because it was much meatier and had way more detailed provisions than it should have, that we ended up either boiling down or taking out entirely. So I think it is doable, with the scope of our work, but it really would be something that I would recommend, be commenced sooner rather than later if we have a hope of getting it done, for 2026. one thing that we had done that I also mentioned to Member Jane just before we convened, as part of that exercise was not only to develop, various proposed changes, but to categorize them, right, in different levels, right? We had level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 was clearly just clean up, elimination of ambiguity, reorganization, stuff that no one could suggest, was anything other than necessary and valuable. Level 2 was things that really weren't, we thought, controversial, but did change things a little bit, right? And brought things up to speed with what best practices, would be. For example, eliminating a very low limit in that case of what, constituted a public work that required city council. That was viewed as a level 2 change. Other things came out of it, a couple that were considered to be level 3 changes, right? Things that were potentially sensitive, right? Related to elections, laws or other things that were possibly sensitive and were worthy of consideration. Hey, should this be included in a comprehensive update where we're hoping everybody likes and accepts the whole thing? Or should those things be carved out, and either not tendered at all or tendered for separate consideration so that, a super sensitive thing wouldn't become the story, right? About, the overall comprehensive and potentially bog it down, and compromise what otherwise would be good, professional work. So those are all things you don't need to decide, today, but would be very much part of the dynamic of the interaction with the Charter Review Commission, if in fact, again, we embark on this process. So I know I've talked a lot. I did want to give you full consideration of it, open to questions now and direction, and city manager is as well, of course. And I'll do the best I can if you have any questions about individual sections to speak for the other departments. But again, ask all the questions you want, but not the idea is not to so much go, hey, here's the list of things we want changed. That's what the process would be with the Charter Review Commission if you decide. So I'll be quiet, Mr. Chair, and turn it back over to you.
Following our standard process, thank you, City Attorney. We'll go to member questions. And I don't know, City Attorney, if the city clerk would like to speak on this, does he speak as a member of the public or as an ex officio type member, or what? How do we want to do that? Okay, very good. Then I will entertain questions by the city clerk at this time as well. So any member of this committee have any questions? Okay, Member Park.
So I actually heard the issue. Well, I heard your description of a standing charter review committee and potentially some of the issues that can come out of that. I have this idea that if you have a committee for the express purpose of doing something, that something will get done every so often, like all the time. Sometimes for things that you don't want to change that often, maybe you don't have something that's always available. I mean, it's one of these things that if you've got a bowl of chips, you're going to go to that bowl much more often than if you didn't have the chips in front of you. I hear about district representatives and one elected at large because we want to mirror how we elect and how we do things on council, but I don't always think that's appropriate. I'll give an example of this, which is we just closed our applications for the bond measure oversight committee. And for that oversight committee, we stated, well, we didn't want too many people from the same district because, well, we didn't want to bias thinking towards a district. Well, that shouldn't have been an issue because this is an oversight committee. It's not a decision committee, but we also changed a little bit of that. But if we really didn't want bias, then what was the purpose of the at-large member, which would immediately create bias in one of the districts, because that at-large member would come from one of the districts. And I think that we really need to think about what our stated purposes are, and what our processes, our procedures are that don't align with our stated purposes. I have this concern about how do we reduce influence from special interest groups. I would like there to be disclosures. I'd like to know upfront, where people are aligned. I would like it to be a mandatory thing, not just something they could do if they so choose. I mean, we've had ethics issues throughout campaigns, and people have signed ethics agreements, and it's kind of funny, but those ethics agreements really only apply to people who don't have an ethics requirement. But elected officials, I mean, at some point, elected officials already have an ethics requirement, and the only people that would need to sign something like that are people who are not elected, people who are running without a title. But I mean, the real issue there is there are no teeth in the ethics program, and I don't know that's something that we can do in the charter. More important than the roles and responsibilities of the city clerk, which is seen as a figurehead role, meaning all of our previous city clerks have had a city clerk certification. They're part of a city clerk organization, and I believe that our assistant city clerk, they are all part of these organizations, and without the certifications, I don't think that you're allowed to go there. But that's not too bad, because we've already defined a little bit vaguely, as the previous city clerk noted, what the roles and responsibility of the city clerk are, and we've reduced the salary to reflect that figurehead role. But we haven't done that for the elected police chief. The elected police chief, who largely no longer runs the department, still gets a full salary. In fact, during a time where the elected police chief was largely absent, we gave the elected police chief a 10% raise. This was done by the salary setting committee, which again is not the council. But I don't know that people understand what the issues are. We don't have any roles and responsibilities. We don't have those responsibilities set. Oftentimes, if people don't have the background, they were just appointed to the management groups, then at some point we need to consider what we're paying for. I have some questions on, those are comments, but I have some questions on, clarify how, when state laws apply if no city charter provision or ordinance exists. I've been told that the capabilities that make charter cities unique are slowly being reduced by state laws, federal requirements. And I don't really know what charter cities can do that would make them unique anymore. Like what do we defer to higher law, and what no longer applies? What no longer, what are things that charter cities are no longer allowed to do, or they're taken up by other things? I do feel the comment about state laws making blanket rules that aren't necessarily appropriate. I mean, I go to every state summit and every federal summit that I can, National League of Cities, California League of Cities, and I hear that largely the state considers cities of similar size, similar population, similar geographic location as being very similar. Whereas I think every resident and every business knows, especially in this area, that cities can be right next to each other in the same geographic area, essentially, where you don't even know where the boundaries are. They can have similar size. They can have similar businesses and be very, very, very different. When it comes to general plan, it doesn't make any sense that we can make a general plan and have that general plan be completely ignored by state requirements that say, well, we don't really care about your general plan. We're going to make state level requirements, and we're going to apply those uniformly across all cities, independent of how the cities were made up, independent of what the city's resources are. I mean, there are some considerations, but they're not the considerations that would be taken by the city officials who would run that city. I'm also concerned that, city charter making changes requires a vote of the people. I actually think that's kind of a good thing, because I've often been told that any changes, any rules that are enacted by ordinances or council policies can be revoked by ordinances and council policies. I really think that if we're going to make a charter change, it should be something that we want to be in the charter, that we want to go through the people. It should be somewhat challenging to make. It should be somewhat challenging to unmake, to change. It should go through a popular vote. Not everything should require that. I think that the city attorney quite rightly brought up a lot of instances, and there's going to be a lot of those. But at some point, once you've made these rules, once you've set lines, it's really hard for people to say, "Well, I want to give that up." I think that there should be something that says these are things that charter cities have some purview over. They're not just things that we want to do, even if they're things that are traditional. I do understand that city attorney, there is something called ambiguity in law and criminal law and things like this. And ambiguity exists for a reason, but at the same time, it causes a lot of problems. But I also know that by removing all ambiguity, you create a crystalline structure that's very difficult to move. I did a lot of reading on this. I did a lot of research on this. And I think it's absolutely true. There may be some disagreement, but I think it's absolutely true that some ambiguity exists for the express purpose of interpretation, because there is some understanding that not every situation can be fully categorized. Of course, that requires checks and balances. That requires that people are generally in agreement towards a greater good. For example, I think that perhaps changing the salary of the elected police chief would be a very difficult thing. But I've been told that one reason that council salaries are so low is because people should not be running for office for the money, and certainly not for the power. So at some point, I'd like to know what the purposes are if we are not going to have real responsibilities. I mean, we kind of know what the responsibilities are for council because we see those every day, but we don't see the responsibilities for city clerk, which was pointed out. And at some point, I don't know what the responsibilities are for the elected police chief. So I think we're absolutely right there, but there are going to be a lot of things that are going to be difficult to change. There are going to be a lot of things that are, they're not going to change for maybe 2 generations. And at some point, rather than a standing committee, maybe there should be a committee every 4 years, every 8 years, every 10 years, so that we get out of a cycle every, non-multiple of 4. We will have a review to look at these kinds of things and keep things modern. And as we do in technology, where things will change due to time, for example, what amount constitutes big data? We will define those not by a number, but by, larger than the amount of data that can be processed easily by an organization. And I think that type of, I'm not saying that would be the definition, but that type of definition would serve us better than fixed numbers. If we tie them to something like CPI, if we tie them to something like AMI, if we tie them to something such as, the price of eggs, well, maybe eggs is a bad example, but to the price of an action, that may be a better view of this, but I don't know how difficult that is. Yeah, so I have some questions there, a lot of comments, but I'll save the other comments for later. Thank you.
Okay. City Clerk, would you have any comments?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Jane, and I'm happy to be here at this meeting. As everyone knows, I am new to the city clerk, elected last November. The city clerk's office, the last full-time city clerk we had was Rod Gierdon Jr., who resigned in 2018. That set a process with the city council, or concerns with the city council, about the city clerk positions itself. At that time, the council had numerous study sessions, brought in other professional city clerks, had presentations open to the public, a lot of public comment, a lot of conversation about how to move forward with the city clerk. It was to be appointed or to be elected. After all that, it was decided that they would hold a special election for city clerk the following November, and they appointed, I think, Jennifer Yamaguma as the acting city clerk under the charter authority that's there right now, under Charter 903. At that time, they also decided that they were going to bifurcate duties, have professional duties as the city clerk performed by the assistant city clerk, with the main duties of the elected city clerk to be that of the elections official and the custodian of the seal of the city. While I have always supported, and I've lived in Santa Clara all my life, I've always supported an elected city clerk. Once I saw these meetings, it did make sense to have professional services of a professional city clerk do the day in, day out routines of the office, taking of the minutes, the ordinances, publication, everything the city clerk's office does. Our current assistant city clerk, I think, has been doing an outstanding job. She's been doing it for the last 6 years, ever since we had a full-time city clerk. We, just to not correct Councilmember Park, but Hossam Agag, the prior city clerk, was also the new elected official and did those same duties. The position is not just a ceremonial position. It is not just a ceremony. It is a part-time position. You're not a full-time employee as the previous city clerk was, but there are important duties that go with this. I anticipate the role of the city clerk to be, my role as city clerk, to be very busy during the election season. My role to be very busy, not only for the elections of city offices, but also for charter amendments that come up, because those are elections also. So you will see me very active. Since taking office, I've reached out to all the council members, and I spoke to you, and we will be meeting soon, I believe, on a one-on-one basis, so I can get your individual inputs into my position and what's going on. I appreciate that. In January, the city attorney and I had a very long informal meeting. I think it was scheduled for an hour, about an hour and 45 minutes. And we discussed many things, and it was very beneficial to me. And we were in agreement on everything that we discussed. In fact, a lot of what he's mentioned today didn't go into depth, but we agreed that the current charter could use a lot of cleaning up and clarification. There is a lot of the charter itself that this charter was first proposed in 1950. This is not the first charter the city of Santa Clara had. We had one in 1927 and we had a charter before that, but it wasn't considered modern charters at that time. The charter that we have today, a lot of the language is the exact language, has not been changed from that charter. And one of those sections is section 903 for the city clerk. Not one word in that charter section has changed, even though we've had an ordinance that bifurcates the duties or delegates the duties to the assistant city clerk, a lot of them. When I took over, when I was elected, one of the issues that I wanted to bring up was really to define the role of the elected city clerk. For the last 6 years, I know Hossam, he's a great individual, but I don't believe that role has been defined clearly for staff, for city council, or for the public on what the elected city clerk actually does. I think we could really benefit here by taking a look at that later, and then possibly charter language, possibly ordinance language, really defining that a little bit better. There are some conflicts, minor conflicts, between the current charter that we have and the ordinance that we have in that. We can discuss that at some other time of what those are. Just minor little conflicts, but those would be nice to be cleaned up. as I was talking earlier about meeting people, the city manager and myself have a meeting today after this meeting to discuss one-on-one about city clerk's roles and responsibilities. So that is all going to be helpful to me. I have been getting a lot of public input on my position and my role and what the public like me, or what the public like to see out of my office. But stepping away from the city clerk right now, I'd just like to talk about the charter. As the city attorney says, this charter came out in 1950. It was, the first amendment to it was in 1952. And when this charter came out, the current charter we're working today, the role of the city clerk and the chief of police were in the charter as an appointed position. In 1951, after this came out, the public, and this is the first time there's ever been a public-driven measure to make a charter change, came forward. They got the signatures, they did what they were supposed to. They brought it in front of council, and at that, to change it back to an elected chief and elected city clerk. But the question only said, shall the chief and the city clerk be elected? And yes, the answer was to do that. Nothing else. So the charter was changed to just having the elected city clerk and the elected chief of police back as being elected positions. So people just seem to plug in verbiage into the charter again, because it was never in there before. The elected position was never in the charter before. So they just put in, oh, by the way, the chief of police and city clerk are elected for 4 years, as the other positions are too. It can use some definition, as I said, on what the city clerk does now, especially since we have an ordinance. And that's something I'll be happy to work on. And I look forward to my role as city clerk. I understand, I fully support that it's a part-time position with some important duties. The rest of the charter, an interesting thing that the city attorney put in your folder was this history of the amendments to our charter since 1950 and 51. Those are the ones that actually made it to the ballot. When I was doing some research after I was elected, there's this big vault in the city clerk's office that has a lot of unique records. And I was looking at some of the charter amendments and conversations and council minutes about the charter, about the city clerk position, about other positions too, that never made it to the electorate, never made it on a ballot. Some of them were approved by council to put it on the ballot. In the last minute, they changed their minds and did not put it on there. But there's been a lot of conversation about, as we just had recently last year, about changing the elected city clerk and the elected chief. So, and all the other issues that you saw on there too, away from just those two items. When you read the question, some of those questions are very confusing. They're just long and they have numerous issues to them. And I think nowadays, and there might even been laws that say questions have to be limited more in scope to what they are. And I'm sure the city attorney would agree that you don't want a confusing question when you're out there on these things. So that's another thing I think I can help with between the council, the city attorney. What we put out to the public for a question would suffice. So I would be happy to do anything that I'm asked to in these matters. And I look forward to working with the city attorney, especially on the city clerk position and any other clearing up of language, which it does. And my last thing here, the city attorney mentioned that many charters sound alike. And there must have been a charter writing school or something when they did this back in the 50s. When you look at the actual government codes that authorizes the charters, you'll see a lot of that language in the specific California government code actually just copied into the charters. So that's why all the charters kind of sound alike, I think. So, it would be good to shorten things up. We have a lot of sections in there that are really out of date. It actually talks about when an election happens, you know, this will happen in the year 2000, we'll elect 5 people, 6 people. That, I mean, that could be cleaned up. You don't need issues that have no concern today to be in that charter, so.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. Well, I think this being Law Day, don't lawyers do everything by boilerplate? You know,
I know boilerplate is a derogatory term, but lawyers celebrate, you know, the importance of boilerplate, you know, as well.
okay, so I have some comments. So first off, the charter definitely needs language cleanup. And I consider that to be non-controversial type things. The city attorney talked about level 1, level 2, and level 3 items. Level 1 is just, you know, making things clearer, not really changing the real functioning of the city, but just cleaning up the language. Then level 2 is changing a little bit of the functionality of how the city operates. Then level 3 is something probably controversial, like outsourcing the city's attorney's office, you know. I did.
Controversial and inappropriate, but please proceed.
And so level 3, I would consider to be really, we want this to pass. So the level 3 items, like in 2000, we had 5 ballot measures. So level 3 items would actually be probably split out into other ballot measures. And I would expect that the Charter Review Committee would be licensed to be able to do that if they so chose, to pick something, say, controversial and split it out. But we really want the cleanup language to pass. We want that to be non-controversial. One thing that I'm not really clear on is how is the charter different than the city code? Because we try to keep the charter minimal, and then we put pretty much all the other functioning of the city into the city code. So I wanted to understand the separation of responsibilities there. And then, of course, one of the key things that I noticed is that this charter doesn't really talk about electronic noticing and publication and storage of documents. So it talks about posting in various public places, and it talks about publishing in newspapers, and there isn't really any consideration of newspapers are going away. So what happens if the newspapers go away? So, and then there are things that sort of change over time, like if you wanted to tie one of the numbers to CPI, where is that number going to be published for the public to know? Say you wanted to tie the city council members' salaries to CPI, and there was a ballot measure in 2000 to actually do that, which I think was rejected. But where would that number be published? But, you know, 2 things that the city attorney mentioned in the presentation were disposal of city property at $500 would have to be noticed and all of that. That was actually Measure K in 2000, and it failed. So is that controversial? It's not really clear to me. And then the other one would be the award of public contracts. That was Measure L in 2000, and that was $50,000, and that failed. So are those controversial? Should those be in the charter cleanup? It's not clear to me. And so, and then as the city attorney mentioned that in Chula Vista, their charter cleanup took 18 months. So starting in September, I know when we did the last ballot measures for clerk and police, we started in September and we really kind of ran out of time. People said we didn't have enough meetings and all of that. So I think we're already late. So maybe September is too late, especially if you want to talk to unions and you want to talk to city employees, which is a much bigger task than what we had before. I had read through the charter and I had a number of observations in the charter. One thing is it says boards can have subpoena power, but our Parks and Rec Commission doesn't actually have attorneys sitting with them. So that didn't make sense to me. And then, like when I was chair of the Charter Review Committee for district elections, the city attorney and the city clerk told me up front I couldn't talk about ranked choice voting. But we eventually did talk about ranked choice voting and at length. So I'm trying to understand what kind of direction would the council give to the Charter Review Committee of what's on limits and what's off limits. So there's a number of things. I'll just point out some observations. The charter points out election dates. It says, I think, the first Tuesday after something for elections. I would rather have it tied to the state or county elections to save money. Rather, because if the state or county changed the way they did it, we'd have to have a charter amendment and it would cost us a lot of money to have a special election. I would somehow tie it to what the state and county are doing. And then it says to fill a vacancy on the council, you have to do it within 30 days, which seems like with having public meetings and all of that seems a little short, recruiting people that want to serve, all of that. And then it says meetings must be at least twice a month. I know we have a summer break for about a month. It seems like it's hard to squeeze in the two meetings because I think we straddle July and August just so we can squeeze in those two meetings. I'd rather make it like 24, minimum 24 a year or something to give us a little more leeway. Then Measure R in the charter actually talks about parks that are listed in the 2010 to 2035 general plan, but it doesn't include any of the new parks. So like the new park at Gateway Crossings, I guess we could sell that if we wanted to, but we can't sell Central Park. So it just seems that it should be somehow updated. And then it also says you can't add a large structure. So we'd have to go to a ballot measure if we wanted to add a new library in one of our existing parks. So that didn't make any sense. So there's a number of cleanups that I've looked at, but I guess what I would say is I just give the Charter Review Committee the license to look at every line. I'm probably starting with the city attorney's office, looking at every line first for cleanup and language changes, and then just let the Charter Review Committee go. But they would then take the controversial items and put them into other ballot measures. And of course, the city council approves all of that. Charter Review Committee is only advisory. Now, those are my comments. Okay, Member Park.
Yeah, so I actually like Chair Jane's comments. I think that they're always very thought out. I think if we look at this, we would see lots of issues that we would have. I know that in the past, we have often had city workshops. I haven't seen a city workshop in recent times, but then again, I don't go to a lot of public city events as much as I did when I was a resident. I understand the charter committee, and I think that there's a lot of discussions, there's a lot of background that even a member of the charter review committee would like to have or should have before they get started. it would be nice, rather than simply appoint a committee, to maybe hold a number of workshops where people can come and see what the issues are, and they could talk about things. We can gauge people's interests in, cleaning up the charter or changing the charter before we went to a committee. I think that that's one of the things that would have helped us very much for the bond measure oversight committee. We could define exactly what this was, so we didn't have discussions on the dais as to what the committee was going to do, whether they had power to prioritize. Also, I've noticed that we go to a lot of sessions. I mean, almost every year there are 2-3 opportunities to have an AB 1234 and AB 1234 training, and almost every single one of those, somebody asks a question about retention of conversations, and oftentimes I hear explicitly from somebody giving the presentation that, well, if you don't want things to be, what is it? If you don't want to disclose things, well, just delete them. And I think, well, that's a really bad thing, especially when you have new council members coming in, because maybe that's something other jurisdictions do, but we have retention policy. And we need to have training that says, even when you're told these things, these are the differences for our city. Like deleting messages is not a good way to try to get around PRA or try to get around things. But when people are being told this outside of the city, I think it puts the retention policy in jeopardy. I think that we should be told explicitly what things are. I understand that, we have a general 1, 2, 3, 4, but again, I think that a good portion of that should be explicitly for this city and how this city, especially for important things like retention policies, are different. I mean, I'd almost like to say, well, we follow state law, and these are the appropriate state laws that we follow. We'd have to track all the changes, and maybe the city charter would be amendments to, or additional things on top of what the state provides. But again, either way, it would be really nice for the people who are selected to be on this committee to have some background a background in what the city charter currently says prior to getting appointed, so that we'll get a larger pool of informed citizens. Thank you.
Would you like to respond to any of that?
Those were all mostly comments as opposed to questions. There was a few questions in there, but I think I have some thoughts that might be useful as you think about this. And then, of course, we need to go to the public too, Chair, as you know. Member Park's first round of comments commented on having, the pros and cons of a standing Charter Review Commission as opposed to one called, right, to have a specific focus. I think he's right. There's pros and cons to that. This doesn't address that, right? Since we don't have a standing Charter Review Commission, this action would necessitate you creating one, at least for this purpose. That's a fair subject to take up probably at a different time as to whether or not you wanted or not to have a Charter Review Commission. But those are thoughtful comments, not part of this particular action, as I think you knew. The Charter Review Commission appointment process potentially could be part of your recommendation, but need not, right? That could be something decided at the council level as to how you wanted to construct, this particular group. There's pros and cons to all sorts of different structures, right? Either having it spread out, by district, having qualifications for people. It's hard to find qualifications for what would make somebody qualified to, be on a Charter Review Commission to comment on what the charter provision says. You will have professional support for that from my office, from the various departments, from the city clerk's office within their areas of expertise. And so again, up for you to decide, but you need not make that part of your recommendation. It could be something that the council just decides about how they're going to go about doing it. I think they could, or we could make them Charter Review Commission members, or you may want to make them Form 700 filers, right, to identify any conflicts that they might have. That's certainly something that could be built into the process. There's a few things that are important issues that I know the city's wrestling with that member Park talked about in his comments that are potential changes, to the charter. A few of those were probably level 3 things, right, that are get into real sensitive areas. And ultimately, it'll be for you to decide, the council to decide what the right work plan, will be. I think member Jane is right in pointing out that I think a level paradigm is a good idea, for this exercise. And then ultimately, based on practical considerations and political considerations, it'll be up to the council to decide what gets proposed, right, as one matter and what might be carved out and proposed as separate matters. One of the things I would caution, particularly if we want to be ready for the 2026 ballot, would be to try to focus them, as much as possible on kind of the gist of this, right? Updating, professionalization, with potentially consideration of other things. But if we have them do line by line, everything goes, right? And think of every conceivable thing you might get, boy, we're not going to get done, by 2026 for sure. So you may want to, balance that in some of your thoughts. Let's see here. And agree with the member Park's comments on ambiguity. They're right. There's I don't know if ambiguity is purposeful. I think so much as you can't build everything into everything you draft, particularly not in a charter, right? Again, it's supposed to be the Constitution. It's not purposely ambiguous so much as you want to be able to have laws implemented in a way that reacts to evolving circumstances. And so there is definitely a high level of interest in what goes in the charter and what doesn't. And part of the art is getting that right. And remember, Jane, to get to one of your questions and understanding kind of what the difference is between, the charter. Again, I think the Constitution analogy is a good one. Really basic things, that you want to be, not immutable, right? But hard to change go in there. And then the laws and the details that implement that go into the city's code. And so the code has to always be consistent with the charter, but it's designed to provide the more detailed rules and considerations, that the charter doesn't get at. With the idea being, things are likely to evolve over time and standards may change. You don't encrypt those standards, you don't chisel those into the charter because you want council flexibility, on how those things might evolve. But if you really care about them and don't want anything made different, than that without a vote of the people, that then goes in the charter. So it's a little bit of, there's art, and science, to how you do it. And part of this process will very much be part of that discussion. Hey, should these details go in there or is that better in the code? What belongs where? So a perfectly appropriate discussion to have. Appreciate city clerk's comments and discussions we had about, role of city clerk and the history of that. His input, of course, will be valuable in that arena, both because he's digging into this stuff, in a meaningful way that's helpful. And of course, he's an active now elected city clerk who really is sincerely interested in defining, what that role is, not necessarily dramatically changing it, but at least making it clear as to, what the expectations, are of that position. Chair Jane, I think we already talked about the charter versus code. I think in enough detail for you. The noticing requirement is a great example of something that might be anachronistic, right? The noticing in the paper. There are still anachronistic notice requirements in state law. So whatever we do in the charter, to the extent state law applies, shouldn't change, what the minimum state law requirements. So a lot of the times you change it, you have what you want and think ought to be in there, always consistent with state law, with the ability to revise over time if there's new, you can do additional things. At a minimum, we want to be able to do this consistent with state law, but if things change, you want to be able to do additional things over time. CPI is another example of, you could embed, if you want to keep up with things that evolve over time, you could embed a CPI. That's not always necessarily the best way either. but for example, a charter could say with, reasonable increases over time to address, market factors in accordance with an ordinance adopted by the city council, right? So you build in the concept for it, but you leave it to the city council in order to amend it. Again, that's one of those what goes where, conversations that we won't resolve today, but is the kind of exercise that always goes into when you're designing a particular charter provision. Member Park, your second. Oh, and your examples were good ones. I know you went through a lot of things that were things that struck you, about the charter that weren't quite right, other than the ones I already mentioned. Again, the alignment of elections with the elections code and what our local jurisdiction does. We kind of have to do that now, right, by necessity in order to hold the consolidated elections. And we tug at the charter provisions a little bit in order to make that work. It ought to not require that type of interpretation or application and should be like you described. Absolutely. And your other Measure R examples, were good ones as well. Member Park, your second round, more talked about other things that you were interested. I'm not sure charter based so much. On the AB 1234 comment you made, you did not ever hear training from me that said just delete things. I don't think you were referring to me. Yeah. So that's not what I would advise. You're absolutely right. We should follow retention schedules. Deletion is not a thing to, just because you don't not want somebody to have something. It ought to be, documents ought to be maintained in accordance with retention schedules, right? Not in order to circumvent the people's ability to obtain access to information. So I guess summing up I think we all appreciate charter is an important document, right? There are any number of reasons to update it and there's value in updating it. Certainly hope for this group's support, to go down the path with a lot still to be determined, including what the scope, would be of the Charter Review Commission, hopefully focused on, right, level 1 and level 2 things with the understanding that things might come up, and be put in that category with ultimately the city council discretion to decide how to package and what to put forward in, if anything. And then in the end, I'd like to say, boy, this exercise is just worth it, right? Even if we don't get everything we want, or anything, on the 2026 ballot, this work, it would be important work that could be held in reserve, right? And when the next election, came up, would be 2028, whenever that would be, the work would be done. It might have to be dusted off and reviewed again. But for me, the exercise is worth it and adds value both to professional staff, to the public reviewing the charter, to any and all of you of understanding, how it would work. And so definitely appreciate your consideration of this process.
Okay, before I go to the public, I did reference Measure K and Measure L in 2000. Those are what you're proposing here. So I guess I would ask staff to really do the research about why those measures failed, because putting something on a council agenda has to cost multiple thousands of dollars for all of the noticing and the agendas and the staff time. So, for having to put something that's $1,000 of work on a public works item, then to have to agendize it is going to cost more than $1,000 of staff time and everything.
That is
So it
absolutely right.
only makes sense. And it boggles my mind. I'd have to go do some research about why Measure L failed back in 2000.
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment. I meant to respond a little bit to that observation. They're very good and important observations. Again, things that are routine in one place may not be routine, right, in other places where people have elevated sensitivities. I don't know how that was packaged. If the proposal was simply to eliminate, that dollar amount figure, that would probably, that would probably not be my, recommendation. Oh, is to increase it to 50,000. Yeah, there can be ways to approach that actually don't even set a limit or that settled, a different limit. But you're right, there'd have to be cognizance and awareness of why it might have failed in the past and considerations about, what would improve its chances of success, because you don't want to spend a lot of money, even if it all makes sense to us, on something that's, going to be DOA, with the public. I know city manager wanted to make some comments too, Mr. Chair. So and maybe in this particular area. So I'd ask to turn it over to him.
Thank you. City Manager?
Sure. Thank you, Chair, Committee Member Park and City Clerk O'Keefe. Really brief comments. Just want to say as a city manager, 110% supportive of the project. Certainly the city manager's office looks towards the charter in our administration of the city's corporate enterprise, and various departments utilize the charter. And there's certainly a need to clean up and modernize the charter, and to look at some of the provisions like we've talked about today, the $1,000 threshold for public works projects, as well as potentially allowing design build, which is a common practice now and can help us expeditiously and frankly more cost effectively deliver some of the projects included in the $400 million general obligation bond. Agree with additional comments that have been made, so I won't restate them. I'll only turn back to the conversation around the intent of this charter review committee. Given everything that's on the city's workload, frankly, from now until, virtually 2/3 way through 2026, I do think providing a prescribed direction to a charter review committee is appropriate. And we've talked about the level 1, level 2, and level 3 items. Level 1 being things that are, generally everyone would look at as cleanup, non-controversial. Level 2, maybe a moderate tweak to what we do, but not really seen as controversial. And then level 3, things that is maybe a significant policy change and may have various sides, may even more than 2 perspectives on it. I do think it would be beneficial for this effort to be looked at as a modernization, cleanup, government efficiency effort. And so truly concentrating and providing direction to a charter review committee that the committee and the council is interested mainly in level 1 and level 2 items. But certainly anytime you gather a group of citizens, you don't want to constrain them. And so if they come across to level 3, let them know that you're interested in that recommendation and want to hear that, but you may not decide to put that on the November 26th ballot. And there are other opportunities to put charter amendments on the ballot. There's just frankly, a lot on the city's work program coming up, and those really controversial issues, I'm afraid, one, they will detract from other things that you've directed that we work on, and potentially detract from the success of a modernization effort.
Very good. And now I'll go to the public. Any member of the public wish to speak on this item?
There's no one online that has their hands raised. Does anyone want to speak? Please raise your hand. No speakers. Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. We have a hand raised. Wanda?
Yes, Wanda Buck. I hardly know what to say, but as a citizen, I observe over and over that meetings go on too long, or there's not enough time to get everything done. And there's so many financial issues before the city. I'm just concerned about the logistics of it all, although it's ideal to have our charter be correct. So that's just one person's opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanda. Okay, anyone else?
No one else
Okay.
online.
Okay, I think we can take action on this item if we want. Is there a motion? I would like to make a motion. I would like to make a motion that we get started. We recommend to the city council that they initiate a charter review committee and a charter review process for the purpose primarily of cleaning up the charter, but not solely for that purpose, meaning that they can discuss other things. And if you like, we can follow the charter review process that we used for Measure A and Measure B in terms of selecting charter review members?
So I'd like to make a few modifications to that. The first thing I want to note is our use. We've been kind of interchanging committee and commission. And I mean, we have this issue with commissions and boards and commissions are kind of the same thing. But when it comes to committees and commissions, they're slightly different. I don't know what the legal, but I mean, the Citizens Advisory Committee was very different from a commission. And I guess I'd like to make it formally a commission instead of a committee. I don't want to split hairs on what the definitions are, but I believe there is a difference. So make it a commission. The second thing is I would like the first thing to be like if we're going to do a first pass, I think that the purpose should be explicitly, as Chair Jane suggested, cleaning up the charter. And for things that are not cleanup of the charter, I would like those to be recommendations to look at for the future, but I don't want the discussions of changes to the charter to derail any discussions. I'd like it to be level 1, maybe level 2. Level 2 where it makes sense to do that, but anything controversial that can be brought up as a recommendation to look at the future, but that's not necessarily something that I want to, because as was mentioned before, we don't have a lot of time if we want to get it for 2026. The other thing is the process was we can follow the review process that we had for Measure A and Measure B. And as I stated before, I would kind of like to see a little bit more than that, both to generate interest and provide a little bit of background to applicants or potential applicants. I would like there to be workshops that go over what the charter says and why we're doing this prior to the formation of a commission. I think that that would also increase the number of applicants to a commission, but I would like that to be a recommendation as part of the process.
Okay, I had some questions for you, Member Park. So for example, changing the dates of the elections, would that be off limits or would that be
Is that a level 2 or level 3?
not a level 3?
Mr. Chair, I would view that as a level 2 item
Yeah.
if you're just looking
Yeah.
to, align.
Align
our,
on, exactly.
we already consolidate the idea that we would have charter provisions that align, with the process we're already undertaking. For me, would be a level 2 change, maybe even level 1, to be honest, given, how that's how we already go about doing our business.
But like, for example, the bidding process, right? Based on the history, I would have thought it would be essentially a level 2 change. But based on the history of the city, it's almost like a level 3 change. So I would allow the Charter Review Committee to consider that and look at the history and decide whether they want to put it in the cleanup ballot measure or a separate ballot measure.
If I might,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I don't disagree with that. I think for me, in some respects, the parameters of what's level 2 or level 3, if it comes from as a professional staff recommendation based upon what they're experiencing and their knowledge is of best practices, it would probably be for me a level 2. Ultimately, you all will decide, as a city council, as to whether or not, regardless of what it's badged as, is something that's worth including in the comprehensive recommendation or as a level 3, tying it into Member Park's observations, which I agree with. Really the idea is stuff that's outside of that professional updating modernization exercise can be identified, but ideally would be identified and then set aside, not for major deliberation, as something that the Charter Review Commission considers worth talking about at a future election. I think if I understood and channeled your comment correctly. So
Yes.
you're right. Those things aren't perfectly defined. But that would be part of the exercise, is to draw some parameters around that going forward. If I might too, and comment on something Member Park said, I appreciate your enthusiasm for this effort. I'm a little concerned about, again, given timing, having workshops before this this process is initiated. For me, it's really a decision whether to go down this path or not. And then absolutely public input. All of the CRC meetings, would be public Brown Act, meetings. And unless they formed an ad hoc subcommittee, right, to focus on a particular subject. So I think there'd be a lot of opportunity, for public input into that process, whether or not to do it or not, and what their primary interests are. I think that will be tough to wrangle and would probably slow down the process in a way that could make it infeasible to complete it. So not to exclude substantial public input, but really more to channel it through the Charter Review Commission in the first place. That's just an observation. Obviously, you guys can recommend whatever you think is appropriate. Thank you.
And I'd like to note the Charter Review recommendation is only advisory. The council can change it however they like. So are you making an amendment to my motion?
Yes, I haven't, I don't believe there was a second.
There was not a second. So
Yes.
you're trying to make an amendment?
Yes.
There be workshops or what?
And I want to address that, which is, I understand about timing, but I think that's why it's absolutely critical that we have an idea of what we're going to focus on. If we leave it to every single change, level 1, level 2, and level 3, then I feel that we'll get a lot more time spent on things that we really need to think about. We really need to spend a little bit more time on, which is why at some point we would look at the changes that we would like to have. And if something's identified as level 3, then that goes into a list of things that, we would do, but there wouldn't be as much time spent on that. That's something that, okay, we know that this would be controversial. We'd like to change this, but let's focus on more of the cleanup, more of the non-controversial things. So that's a little bit of that. The other thing that I note is, I understand this thing about timing, but my concern is, we have this saying, we don't know who it's attributed to. Well, we don't know who said it, but we know who it's attributed to. A lot of people is, if you've got an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, if you've got a limited time to chop down a tree, then you would spend 1 hour sharpening the axe. You should prepare for this. You get cleaner cuts and the job gets done much more quickly. And I kind of agree with that approach, which is, it's not just to inform, it's not just for, wasting time to talk about it. It is to teach people about why we're doing something, to inform the people who may be future applicants to the commission, and to drive engagement. I think that saying that, well, we don't have time, let's not do any preparation, let's just go for it, is not a good way to move forward. I think that having some preparation, I'm not saying it have to be 10 workshops, 5 workshops, maybe it should be 1 or 2, right? Maybe there should be 1 on the north side, 1 on the south side, of the city. I don't know how you want to do it, right? But I do think that having some background on what the charter says and, going over the history, presentation much like this one would be good to get people to come, get people informed on what the issues are and drive engagement, so that when they go on charter, we're not spending a lot of charter meetings, because we usually limit the number of review meetings that we have. And I don't want those review meetings to be coming up to speed. I would like some people to have some idea before they start.
So a thought on that, thanks to the city manager, and I think it's a really good thought, which can accomplish a lot of different things. I think both educate people who might be interested, and maybe do a filtering of, okay, here's what you're in for, right? Do you really want to do this? Is have that, if in fact this goes to council and the council decides to proceed, have that held as part of the CRC member recruitment process. Have a public meeting where the whole process is described to the public generally, to prospective applicants, to receive input, and you're more likely to get an informed, and committed, group of folks applying to that. The CRC itself can obviously have other public meetings and things before it gets on the ballot, but at least one of those, Member Park, I think is appropriate. And thanks to the city manager for, I think, suggesting that.
Agreed. Thank you very much for that. So,
I had a comment. So the very first charter review committee that was supposed to look at districting didn't even get there. They didn't even make a recommendation. So it's really incumbent on the chair of the charter review committee to be cognizant of making sure that they finish in time within the number of scheduled meetings, and that they actually do have a recommendation of the council in the time frame. And it's incumbent on the chair to try to weed out items that are going to distract from the main goal of the charter review committee.
great.
And that can certainly be part of the education process too, and impress on folks who are applying the timeline and the importance of leadership, of that group. So I think I've heard, and we've got your other comments about the level 2 and level 3, I can see as kind of just being an elaboration on the initial motion. So I think we understand what you're looking for and can appropriately draft, that recommendation.
Okay, but again, if it's not in the motion, then
No, I heard it it's in the motion. I understand what's being
Right.
proposed.
yeah, but
I-
I don't think.
You
there's a
reckon,
motion.
If you want to restate
well,
it,
you
Herbert.
recommended
Yeah.
that we have multiple workshops. Staff is recommending one workshop, which is basically a recruitment meeting. So you have to make an amendment to my motion for what you want.
So previously, there wasn't talk about any workshops.
Yeah, so you don't need to formally do that in this setting, Chair. You can by consensus agree if Member Park agrees as a friendly amendment to include that in what you're recommending.
Oh, well, I would make another motion. I don't think it would be an amendment. I think I would make another motion. Let the first one die for lack of second and make another motion.
Okay.
I
The chair's
believe that-
approval.
Yeah, I believe. I
Yes,
believe that's the
it
process.
dies for lack of second. Absolutely.
So the recommendation was to start, to bring to council recommendation to start a charter review commission for the purpose of identifying how the charter could be cleaned up, perhaps identify what we have discussed here as level 3 items. But, those would go on a list. Those wouldn't be looked into in detail, meaning if something is identified as a level 3 item, that goes on a list and the commission moves on with at least one workshop to be held prior or as part of the recruitment process for the commission. And the process for the commission selection to be determined. I believe that originally it was as Measure A and Measure B, which I believe was appointment by each council member and one at large. While I'm not entirely against it, there's a lot of problems with that method. To be determined, not excluding, the method that we use for Measure A and Measure B, which may be what council goes with anyway, but I would like that to not be part of the measure. Or part of the.
And I understand that perfectly with comments by city manager.
Would you like staff to bring back options to the city council for how the committee should be appointed? That way you can make that decision when you make the determination that there will be a charter review committee.
Sure, and I want staff to be cognizant that there have been recommendations brought to council previously on how committees and how commissions should be formed. And if there are other methods, I would love to see them as well. Right, and at some point, we will probably have to, do we have to hire a consultant to help lead those meetings, or would that be purely staff driven?
or let me clarify. What I was thinking is we would bring you a number of alternatives.
Yes.
Not just one recommendation, but we would bring you various methods for the committee members to be appointed. And then you would choose from among those or another idea that comes up at that meeting.
Yes, and I'm going to say, I just wanted to be cognizant that we have seen different methods before, and if you're going to bring them to us, don't bring just the same ones that we've seen. We could get review of those, but if you could try to find other methods.
I'll second that. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, passes 2-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
All right, we can move on to item number 3 now on the agenda, which is discuss and provide direction to staff on a potential council policy that provides guidance on the scheduled start times for council meetings. Is there a staff presentation? Okay.
I'll take that, Chair Jane. So this item is being brought to you for discussion and potential direction. There's only a few slides, and I just want to provide some introductory comments prior to the discussion. So as the City Council knows, Section 707 of our city charter provides for 2 regular City Council meetings per month, but does not specify the date and times for such meetings. Staff annually brings forward a resolution to the City Council, and traditionally your regular meetings have started at 7 p.m. and the city has strived to schedule any closed session or study session to occur on the same day, either at and historically at 5 o'clock. We've recently aimed to start scheduling those at 5:30, which limits the potential time from 2 hours to an hour and a half because the regular meeting typically starts at 7 p.m. Staff aims to do their best when polling council members for their availability. As you know, we oftentimes have special meetings on a non-regular meeting day. I believe actually in the month of May, you have a meeting every month. And in the last week in May, you have 2 meetings for that last week. And so your normal business calendar has been fairly impacted. And I do remember before starting this position nearly 2 years ago, your consent items would go into double letters. And so we've aimed to rebalance your items such that we can hopefully conclude at what some would consider a reasonable hour and limit the number of items on a particular agenda, which means that we oftentimes need a special meeting. But this item we're bringing to you really because we have ran into some challenges with scheduling meetings. Frequently, staff does repeated polling attempts to try and ascertain council's availabilities. We all know for council members, by definition, this is not a full-time job, but the amount of time it requires is very, very significant. And we have council members, some of them have regular full-time jobs, others own their own business. Council members have both city travel and personal travel, and it can be difficult when there's not a set date to have a meeting and we need a special meeting. I will also say that there have been times where it has taken quite a long time to schedule a meeting because staff has, in the absence of council policy, strives to have every council member at a meeting. And if in particular, there's a special meeting on a fairly impacted time of the year or month, and all of the opportunities for when the consultant can be there, when the various staff members can be there, does not align with the particular schedule of the 7 individual council members. There are times where several dates, sometimes 5 or more, are polled to council. And what that means is that that work is pushed off, and sometimes we spend several weeks attempting to schedule a meeting. There are also times where staff will schedule a meeting at a time where a particular council member cannot be there. not to disadvantage that council member, but to say, we really need this business item to be conducted. Your regular schedule is impacted, as you know, oftentimes on your regular calendar. We have public hearings that have to be noticed by state law prior to the meeting. And as we went through the city's business calendar with the senior leadership team yesterday, all of your meetings essentially through June 10th are filled. Some of them have 4 or more public hearings that have to occur on that day based on noticing, based on timing of the project. And so there's a need to schedule special meetings, and it can be a challenge. What we don't want is for any individual council member to feel disadvantaged because a meeting is scheduled at a time when they cannot be there. And so would like to engage the committee in a discussion on how the process works today. Do you want to provide direction to staff to come back to you with policy around either the meeting start time or how we poll for those meetings relative to the start times? And historically, Santa Clara has picked 7 p.m. to start their regular meetings. What that means is it's, I think, believed to be a good time because the public, it's believed to be a better time for the public to attend, because if work ends at 5 o'clock for a lot of people, and all of the normal routine that a member of the public would need to do, 7 o'clock, I think generally in Santa Clara has been set at a time where the public would be able to attend either in person or remotely. I will say not all local governments, even in our area, have a 7 o'clock start time. Some have a 6 o'clock start time. And when we strive to not go late into the wee hours of the night or the morning, the earlier you start, the better, right? And so embedded in this conversation is, do we want to continue to have our regular start times at 7 o'clock, or do we want those at 6 o'clock? In addition, I will also discuss closed sessions for a moment, because as the council knows, we are entering a time where we will have a very, very busy closed session calendar. There are only a few prescribed reasons why the city council can have a closed session. And during the normal year, there are various reasons, litigation, labor negotiations, where you need a closed session. This year in particular, we have, I believe, 7 labor groups whose contract are coming up for expiration. We are actively negotiating with some, but you will need many, many closed sessions through the end of December. And we've talked about having those occur on regular meeting days. So frankly, not one of the 2 Tuesdays in a month that are a regular meeting day. And so also as a part of this conversation, I do think that we have been successful as of late scheduling those, but as they get more impacted, during the end of the, closer to the end of the year, we will likely work with the city council to say, because of the number of labor negotiation conversations we need to have, we want to pick a certain day and just have that reserved on your calendars. We don't necessarily need that in policy, but I wanted to just toss that in general into this conversation as well. And lastly, as we talk about a potential policy around this, at this moment, I do not know if other cities have prescribed policies to say something to the effect of staff will strive to have every council member at a special meeting. However, after polling for 3, staff shall go ahead and schedule at a time where the majority of members can be there, right? And then maybe, I can see challenges with that, because if the time is, let's say, 5 o'clock, where 6 people can always be there, and the 7th person has a work commitment where they just can't be there at 5 o'clock, they can also feel disadvantaged, because either by policy or by practice, a meeting is being scheduled at a time where they have a personal or business need, and so they will feel disadvantaged, right? And so I think we are where most cities are, which is we don't have prescribed policy around how meetings are scheduled. but staff does their best professional effort in doing that. Although we have had problems where it has just taken so long to schedule a meeting, where business is delayed or we schedule it and one or more council members feel disadvantaged. And so with that, just want to close my remarks and open the discussion and happy to answer any questions. And we do have Nadine Nader, who's our Chief Operating Officer, who supports this process, as well as Maria Lee, the Assistant to the City Manager, who works in the Mayor and Council unit that interfaces with City Council members directly with scheduling these meetings. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry, Chair, if I could just also
yes.
add, we used to, by practice, hold on the council members' calendars the off Tuesdays, just as in case we needed a special meeting. Somehow along the way, I think we stopped doing that, but that is also an option that we could consider.
Okay. Do we have any questions by members? Okay, I guess I will go ahead and make your comments.
I mean, I think that everyone understands that council is a part-time job. But it has full-time expectations. I think that if you tell residents that you can't do something because, well, it's a part-time job and we don't have time for that, I don't know I don't know how well that would fly. Actually, I do know how well that would fly. It doesn't fly at all. But we really need to think about how council is representative of the public. I mean, if the only people that can be on council are people who are retired or independently wealthy or people whose work aligns with policy, that's not necessarily representative of what the people are. I think that a lot of the people in our city, the majority of people in our city, cannot be on council because they have full-time jobs. They've got family commitments. They've got other things they need to do. Some people have more than one job. And even if they decided to, run for council, they could make a lot of sacrifices along the way. There is no payment that would make up for the loss of a job for city council. This is not just about timing. This is a lot about representation. I've had people tell me to my face that, well, if you can't take the time, maybe this isn't the job for you. And I said, well, no, it absolutely is the job for me because I represent a portion of the public that has had no representation prior to me being on council. I mean, historically, Santa Clara has picked 7 p.m. and I used to come here every single day after my job, 7 p.m., stay until sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning, where sometimes council meetings ended at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then at 3 a.m., go back to my job because that's what the requirements were for my job. Some cities have an earlier start time, but I do know that having the start at 7 p.m. allowed me to meet with my residents when I was a resident myself, talk to them. We would share dinner together, talk about what's coming up at the upcoming meeting, and then come to the meeting together. I don't know that the purpose of timeliness at the exclusion of public convenience is a worthwhile endeavor. That's the first thing. Special meetings, I think that for council meetings that are scheduled, that are on our regular meetings, they're on our calendar. I don't know that we've had a problem with that. I think the problem with that comes up with when people have events that come up that were unscheduled. We've had conferences that were unscheduled come up. We've had other meetings come up. I think most of the problems come with special meetings and with closed session. I mean, closed session, perhaps those should only be special meetings. I mean, maybe we start at 6 for a closed session for short items, and anything that requires substantial discussion, we understand that we have substantial discussion necessary and we will schedule those appropriately. I mean, I understand people say, well, we strive to have every council member at a meeting, and I'm going to say that may be a good strive, but it fails often. I have said no to many special meetings that have been scheduled. I was supposed to be preparing for a trip last special meeting, and I came in here because, well, we had a special meeting planned, and staff knew I had a trip planned. I even had that on my calendar. I said no. I doubly said no. I usually don't respond at all, especially if it's a regular meeting, because, well, it's a regular meeting. I'm going to be there. And I can tell you, every single time I've said no, the meeting's been scheduled anyway. I shouldn't say that. There are some that have been rescheduled for some other times, but I've been to a number of meetings that I have said no to. And in some cases, I shouldn't have even had to say no, because on my calendar, it tells you this is a busy time. I remember when you schedule something at 5:30, well, it's after 5, that's true, but there's travel time, there's traffic. And I used to try to rush. Now I think, well, if I can make it safely, and I'm late, then I made it safely. And if I can't make it safely, I'm not going to go. I know that in high tech, actually, I see this in board meetings and other board meetings as well. There is an agenda item, and then next to the agenda item, there is a time allotment. There is a scheduled time. This thing we think should take about 15 minutes. It doesn't have to make it onto the actual calendar, but I think that that's a good way to schedule how much time we think something will take. There are some items that are very controversial that we know people are going to talk about, but we should have an idea of what those are. I recognize that our consent calendars have been much more reasonable than they were 3-4 years ago, where we would get, item AA, AB, AC, and things like that. It was kind of ridiculous. But again, one of the reasons that we have meetings is not just so that council can meet, but it's also so that public can have input. And public wouldn't need as much input if council were more representative of the public that's there. And the public that's there, most of them are working class members. Not the same thing as saying we have a job. They're working class. If they don't work, they don't make money. I know several council members are, very rush in to say, well, I have a full-time job too. That's not the same thing. I think we need to look at what the purpose of our body is. It's not just to make decisions. At some point, decisions will get made, but it is for the purpose of democracy, which is more people, more voice. And if the makeup of the council will not provide the voice for the people, then I think having start times where the public can attend is critical. That said, as one of the council members that does have commitments outside of council, that does try to go to conferences, that does try to go to community engagement meetings, that does have a family, that has, that has needs, special needs, that is part of the working class. I would think, or I'd hope that staff would take that into account. And when I say no, and I've talked to other council members, I've said, listen, I can't make it at that time. They're going to schedule it anyway if I'm the only person that disagrees. I've had people tell me to my face, well, it sounds like a personal problem, because I can make it. I'm saying that it can't be a majority rule. There must be some mechanism, even for schedules, that allows people in the minority who cannot make a meeting to have some effect, at least on the start time. Just because you can't make it doesn't mean that we're going to cancel it. But if we can do something to adjust the time so that you can make it, that there should be some consideration of that. That said, I don't know what you're looking for there, but I would like a recommendation. I'd like to look at maybe closed session meetings. Maybe they start at 6 and we have short items. They start at 6 and we get through them. And if we don't get through them, we'll continue them after the main meeting. If we know in advance that they're going to take long, we're going to schedule those. We're going to schedule those as special meetings. But again, I have gone to every regularly scheduled meeting. I have not said no to any regularly scheduled meeting. It is the special meetings. It is the meetings that start much earlier than travel time from get off at 5. Travel time here isn't 30 minutes, not if you're coming from Pleasanton. Sometimes it's more than an hour. And in some lines of work, there is no option to leave early. You have to leave when the thing is done, when the meeting is over, when your meeting with the client is done. And I feel that people who've forgotten this, should go out and talk to people in the working class, more often. So my recommendation would be to go to council with a recommendation, and I'm not going to make specific things, but how we manage special meetings and closed session meetings. I would like to suggest that we start close to 6 every single time. If we need for timeliness, we need an earlier start time, that those would be exceptions. And that we strive to have every council member at a meeting. If there is one or two, if there's a minority who can't make it, to look for accommodations prior to simply scheduling the meeting. I don't know what else you'd want to add to that or remove.
Okay, so I have some comments here. Santa Clara is a very complicated city. I mean, when I talk to other cities, they don't have a $700 million electric utility. They don't have a convention center. They don't have a stadium, and they don't have 2 universities. So my feeling is we can't, and if you just look at the council meetings with special meetings, we cannot do our business in 24 meetings. So as Chief Officer Nadine Nader had said, that we used to schedule these other off council meeting days. Maybe we need to consider as a council that we have 3 meetings a month. I know it probably works out if you actually count up all the meetings we have. We probably have 36 meetings a year. So that would give people certainty at the beginning of the year. They could schedule their other activities around those meetings. Another option is VTA, they have their closed session at the end of the meeting. So we could actually have the public come at 6 or 7, and that would, and if the closed session is at the end of the meeting, then we could make sure that we could get the public's business done and then do the closed session. It impacts staff because often staff needs to be there. If you have closed session at 5:30 to 7, it's probably easier to get staff there. So that's something to consider, but the way that we would make sure that the business gets done would be what VTA does, which is you have a limit of 30 minutes, maybe an hour for public presentation. Then you would go into your public business, then you do your closed session, and then you'd come back to public presentation at the end. And then the fact that we have consent items going to double letters, that doesn't actually take any more time because we always pass the consent agenda with 1 vote. Where it takes time is the agendas get really long, and that's only because we have a very complicated city. So if you're reading the packet, there's just a lot of stuff to consider there. And then I personally have observed that some council members are just intentionally not available because they might want to delay a decision or a vote. So I think having a limit of 3 polling cycles or 3 dates being polled and then just scheduling the meeting is appropriate because one council member could actually intentionally delay a meeting or a discussion for months. And I don't see any way around that. Those are my comments. Does staff want to respond to any of that?
First, I think our goal was to start the discussion. What I think I've heard is a confirmation that staff looking at various policy options is a good idea to provide additional definition and criteria around how meetings are scheduled, when and what time, and so we can certainly do that. Certainly based on the conversations, a number of thoughts have occurred to me as well as other staff, and so I think that we can come back to this committee first with a number of options for meetings, both or that include the number of meetings a month, when special meetings are scheduled versus closed sessions. Also, how many times or dates we poll before we schedule a meeting where the majority cannot be there. Based on comments that Councilmember Park has raised, I also think policy or guidance around if a meeting is scheduled where one council member cannot be there, the next time a meeting is scheduled, we would strive to not have that same council member excluded, right? You would rotate. Now, all of this sounds great in theory. And so there would need to be a way where there is flexibility, because there are just times where there's a business need and sometimes even a legal need or a negotiation need for a meeting to occur very expeditiously. And so we would build that into the policy. And I do think that the policy should include a requirement that when staff or the city manager deviates from that policy to schedule a meeting, we communicate to the council when the meeting is being confirmed that we've done X, we've done Y, but because of that and because of this need, we're scheduling the meeting, just so it's clear the reason and the rationale. But I do think based on the conversation, we can put together a number of policy options for the committee to discuss and then ultimately recommend to the council.
Good, I'll go to the public now. If any member of the public would like to speak on this.
No hands are raised online.
Okay, very good. So we're just waiting for staff to come back to us. All right, now we can move on to item number 4, review and action on the 2025 Governance and Ethics Committee work plan.
Okay, I will take this one too, likely also supported by staff that are here. So as the committee knows, you have a annual work plan. We've talked about this a lot. I believe this was on your last meeting, but it was rescheduled to this meeting because on that last meeting, you had a item that took up most, if not all of the meeting. That said, this is a preliminary work plan. It will be changed. One, because of the item we just talked about. We will strive to put that those policy options together and bring them back to you. And then we will also, there's an addition here, because at your last meeting, you had a very long conversation on the work around the ethics policy that's being done, and that work will come back to you. I believe at your September meeting, which is not shown on here, but we would make that addition. And so just going through the slide, I won't go through what we've talked about today because we're actively living that. But at your June 3rd meeting, what is on your work plan is a review and approval of amendments to Council Policy 035, the naming of community facilities. There was some work done on this before. There was a committee set up to make recommendations, but we want to bring back that policy to this committee and really have a confirmation of what the committee desires. If the committee desires any changes to the policy, I know there have been general conversation of should someone be deceased before a facility is named after them, and then what are the criteria if someone is living and how that process works. Next, we want to bring back Council Policy 043 around official travel by elected officials, as well as Policy 006 guidelines for commissioners' attendance at conferences and training events. There are frankly just some outdated things in there about how tickets are purchased and scheduled and frequent flyer miles and things like that. And so we want to bring that back and have a discussion. What I will add to that June 3rd item is the policy that we just talked about, which is a policy on scheduling meetings for the city council. And then if we can go to the next slide, the September 8th review and approval of potential amendments to Council Policy 050, gifts for elected and appointed officials, review and finalization of ethics documents, and a update on the Ethics Commission work effort. And so the first ethics item you had a presentation on at your last meeting. The second item was direction from the city council based on a recent grand jury report to look at establishing an ethics commission. And so we will bring that item back with the work that the consultant is doing on that. Your final meeting of the year, a informational report on the recruitment and selection process for the upcoming work plan for 2026. We'll talk about a review of a policy limiting limiting resolution matters for outside jurisdiction of the city. That is typically there are requests or even desires for councils to make statements on matters outside the subject matter jurisdiction of Santa Clara. Some cities have policies to say that they won't do that. Other cities have policies that provide guidelines around what they will do, but certainly that's been a topic of significant that has been debated a lot. And so we want to bring that back. Additional review of text messaging retention and applications and SMART. You had a presentation on that in 2024. The IT department has done additional work on that. And so we want to come back to you with that. I personally hope that we can conclude that work sooner and bring it back to you sooner. And so to the extent that we can do that, I'd like to move that up. And then review of a city council policies and procedures manual, first draft. I don't think we've talked about this much, but right now the city council has various policies. They're numbered. They're not in one document. And so what we want to do is at a staff, it's a staff level initiative to collapse them all first into one document, but then also look to merge those into a seamless policy and procedural manual, frankly, a document that can be handed out to every council member, every new council member, and the public. That's not various policies on individual PDFs that are on the website. Many cities have a council policy and procedural manual. Even if the content is the exact same, it just reads a little better. It's easier to consume than individual policies. And so we're looking to make that effort and bring you back a first draft by the first meeting in December.
Okay, are there any comments or any suggested changes to the order of those? That's okay.
So the last item, the review of city council policies and procedures manual, I think that's a great idea. I think that that is something that sorely needed here, which is stuff that would not be managed or handled outside of this city, and something that I think every council member and even the public should know about. Things like text messaging retention. I find it funny that we have IT controlled devices and they need to ask us what information is there. I feel like we should look into how high tech does it, where I don't have to provide the messages myself because the organization that manages my device already has it. I think that that is much better than having to deal with people who don't understand the retention policy, that don't follow the guidelines of the retention policy, which is it should not be a thought at all. It should be, this is what happens. I think that the work schedule looks very good. I know that there may be some changes. I do know that the way that we got so full in the work plan is as time went on, people said, oh, we should talk about this. We should talk about this. Something came up and we really need to discuss that. Somebody else suggested something, which is a good idea. And I don't know that we should consider these schedules. I mean, the way that we did I do things is I make my agendas 80% full. And that way, if there's an emergency item, I can add that. And if there's not an emergency item, well, you just got 20% of your time back. I think this is a good way to handle things that come up rather than, it's better to have some space reserved or take something out before you have to put it in, right? But just to squeeze more and more things into a schedule, to an agenda is very difficult. So that's, I can think of things that we can add to this, but we'll talk offline. I do like the fact that we finally got to talk about this.
I had some comments and then you can make some comments. For our June 3rd meeting, the review on the policy for official travel by elected officials and the guidelines for commissioners' attendance and conferences. I agree, the frequent flyer thing is kind of a mess. We need to clean that up. But more fundamentally is like, I really want commissioners who are volunteering their time to be trained, to be well-trained. And there should be sufficient budget for them to go to conferences and meetings to be able to get the training that they need. So I know there's, what they can do, but like I had an issue once where the city had a policy where they had already defined which conferences people could go to, and I wanted to go to one that was outside of that. We changed the policy of the city manager could approve those, but I just wanted to make sure that we're consistent with all of our policies.
Sarah Jane, I'll just agree. I mean, one of my budget philosophies is even in bad times, you don't cut the training budget, for staff. And so we have historically cut back on the training budget. We have built more training budget in there. And I certainly understand the comment around make sure that our board and commissioners have sufficient budget to go to training to get the expertise in their subject matter jurisdiction. And in regard to Committee Member Park's comment around managed devices, I totally agree. We have historically not actively managed some IT devices, and we're moving toward a more active management of IT devices.
Okay, so I think we're just going to say this work plan looks okay. We don't need a motion for that.
You could certainly approve it less
Well, I-
formally by consensus, but you could also make a motion and approve it.
I think the recommendation is approved, but I don't know.
Okay, a motion to approve this work plan.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes. All right, with that, I believe we are adjourned.
Well, I do have some comments.
Okay, Member Park.
So, I mean, this is a little bit, this is about item 3. But in general, when we do polling, we used to have real polls, and the polls used to be, tell us what times you're available. And, they could give us a lot of times that, okay, well, we've got any of these Fridays between 9 and 3, and, this Tuesday between this, that, and we could actually respond and say, these are the times we can make it. It was a little bit more complex because we had a lot more options that we had to select. And then for some reason that went away and it got replaced with, well, can you make this date at this time? No, give me another. And I've often responded, I send what it says. If I say maybe or I say no, I often say, could you move the time back? Could you do this? I can't make this date. Could you make another date? And those get ignored. I don't even know what the process is for basically acknowledging comments that come back. But I would kind of like to see real polls sent back again. I mean, what I tell constituents is your right to vote. I mean, the vote, you get to make the final decision. But if you don't have a choice if you don't have an option to help create the selections, the choices, then simply being able to vote on something is not really all that great.
So, Committee Member Park, I will have additional discussions with staff on why that practice changed. I did have a high-level discussion with staff about that not too long ago. And one of the challenges is that every council member does not utilize their city calendar to have the full totality of meetings that they have. And it can sometimes take several days to get all 7 council members to respond. And then the thought that if we are asking council members to respond, not with a quick yes or no, I can make this time, but instead we're asking them to do additional work to look at their calendar to say what times they're available in a given week, the workload and the amount of time to actually poll for that meeting increases. And so I do think that there were some reasons why staff moved away from that practice. As we come back to you, I do think that we can provide additional recommendations on how calendars are managed, because there are ways for council members to block off. And I know you are one that adds most of, if not all of your meetings to your city calendar, or you block off personal time. And so that gives staff a window into what your availability, that doesn't happen across the board. And so let us just take that back, and we may have additional recommendations on how the city council calendars and the polling process works.
Okay, we're adjourned then. Thank you.